So, hello everybody, thank you for coming. My name is Brittany, I'm the current Watershed Manager at WRIG. There's a sign-up sheet going around if you don't mind signing it. Yeah, we're very excited. So, first thing I like to do is welcome MacQuarrie. She's the Director of Watershed and Wildlife for the Community Land Environment, and she's going to do a presentation on the wildlife management funds. Awesome.
There we go. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. So, welcome. Thanks very much. I appreciate the invitation to be here tonight. This is a lot of pressure on me. We have a professional teacher in the audience that speaks on a regular basis, so I'm really interested in this. See what we can do. Brittany asked me to talk tonight about the Watershed Management Fund and specifically how the funds are allocated. And I hope not to draw out the topic. When I'm done with that, this will probably only be probably 15 minutes or so. Lots of opportunity for questions and discussions afterwards. So if you have questions on anything that I present or anything else around watersheds, by all means, feel free to let me know. Okay. So I've got the next one up on screen. How did you do that? This is different than right here. Yep, that's something to do that. Excuse us one more. It's on the next one. Alright, hopefully this one. Success. So a very brief history of the Watershed Management Fund and how we got to where we are now. Back in 2003, there was about $152,000 for watershed management across PEI. There were only a handful of groups, and there wasn't any direct linkage between the funds and the work. So work would put in for funds and they'd get a set amount, but it wasn't directly tied to the work that they were doing, and clearly there was a lack of funds for all of PEI, with only $152,000 there at the time. By 2007, the fund had grown to $459,000. By 2011, we had seen some changes in the watershed management funding on PEI. We now had about $833,000 for the province. We had the groups that we have now, about 23 groups across the province. Today we have 24. And there were some bonuses for watershed planning and bonuses for smaller groups that wanted to amalgamate and partner with their larger ones. By 2015, it had grown to $870,000, and during the last election, there was a campaign promised by the Liberals to contribute another $250,000, which they recognize. So today the fund stands at $1.12 million. Now, the issue with that is throughout the evolution of the fund, there really wasn't a funding formula or a clear, transparent way to allocate those funds. So the Watershed Management Program came over to me in the Forest, Fish and Wildlife Division in 2015. At the time, some additional funds were added. And one of the first things the Watershed Alliance said is, Kate, we need to sit down and negotiate the funding formula. Because at that time, if you were to ask me, why does Wheatley River get this amount and Hillsborough River gets that amount, there was no way that I could tell you. There was no historical reason. It was one of those kind of, because we've always done it that way, which isn't a very good answer. So, to its credit, the Watershed Alliance said, okay, let's sit down and work out a funding formula. And that's what we did. So the objectives of the formula were to be transparent, fair, and predictable. So we wanted the groups to be able to understand why they were getting money that they were getting. I wanted to be able to stand up in public, to the media, to government, to the groups, and say, this is why you're getting what you're getting. And to be predictable, because it's not very good if you're trying to do year-to-year planning and you don't know how much money you can expect in 2019 versus 2018 versus 2020. There's got to be some way to know what to expect. But of course, those are just the means. That's not the outcome. The outcome that we're looking for is for high-capacity groups that are getting good results and providing good value for money. Those are some of the measures that we're looking for. Okay, so how the funds are allocated today, so that we had a few more funds that were added last year. And right now, the total envelope for watershed management in the province is $1.195 million. We could talk about 1.2 just to round it off, because 1.195 is a pain to say. However, this is how it's allocated. So $25,000 out of that envelope goes to the Watershed Alliance. And the 24 watershed groups we have on PEI are all members of the Watershed Alliance. So it does things like it provides training opportunities, it provides the insurance for the groups, it buys like a pool of insurance that covers all the groups. It assists with funding applications, all sorts of things like that. So $25,000 off the top goes to the Alliance. Of the remaining $1.17 million, 50% is allocated based on the area of the watershed, and I'm going to explain that a little bit more in a sec. 12.5% each is based on leveraging, and that just means how much money is raised from other sources, and community involvement, so how much engagement is there with the local community. And 25% is based on the performance, or the track record of the group, so basically how good is the work that you're doing. So to describe that a little bit further, 50% based on area, pretty clear, transparent, easy to communicate. It's $1.09 per hectare, up to a maximum of $58,000. And of our 24 groups, only 2 meet that cap. The Surrey watershed and the Southeast watershed, which is down in the Montague Valleyfield area. Those 2 have such a great area that if we were to allocate $1.09 per hectare for their whole area, it would just take up too much of the fund. So the groups agreed a cap of 58, and that is applied equitably to all except those 2, and they know that they're capped. The 12.5% based on leveraging. So that's how much funds are raised from non-provincial sources. So what we count for that is any federal, municipal, or private funding, just because it was a recommendation of the Alliance not to kind of stack funding, so to count jobs for youth or some of those other provincial funds. And there's just 5 buckets there, basically. If the group raises less than $10,000, they don't get any amount under that. If they raise between $10,000 and $20,000, they'll get $2,500. Up to the very high category, greater than $250,000, they'll get a bonus of $15,000. And of course, there's questions around that. So why are folks getting more the more they raise? You would think if you raise more money, maybe you'd need less from the Watershed Fund. The Watershed Fund was never intended to fund 100% of the work that the groups need or to be the sole source of money. So it's a way to try to recognize the effort that goes into fundraising from other sources and to encourage groups to go after that funding as well. So where it gets a little bit more complex is the community involvement and performance. And at the end, I'm going to go through and I'll show you how Wheatley River was scored last year. And so you can kind of see how that was applied. So these are the factors that go into the community involvement, and every point is worth $150. So I point that out because it's one of the questions that I get is groups will sometimes be object that they'll say, how come I only got 12 on communications rather than 13? And I can explain why that is, because there's ways that we break that down, and I'll describe that in a few minutes. But if you lose a point, you're only losing $150, so there's a bit of that perspective as well. So if groups have a full board of directors for a full year, meetings with minutes like we're doing here tonight, 5 points. How many members you have, so if you have fewer than 10, you only get 1 point there. If you have more than 50 members, you get the full 4 points. And you can see the other scores down there. The other thing that I think is important to point out is this isn't intended to be a checklist for groups to say, okay, I have to have a full year-round office, and I have to have at least 5 events with 10 participants. What this is for groups to set their priorities, and this is how it's recognized under the formula. So to give you an example of that, office hours was one that came up in my discussion. And groups would say, well, we don't have a need for a year-round office. Why are we being penalized with a point system if we don't have that? But in reality, it's the other side of the coin. You're not being penalized. The groups that do have a year-round office have additional expenses. They have to clear snow in the winter. They've got heat. They've got lights. So it's a way to recognize if you do have a year-round office, you're incurring additional expenses. We'll recognize that under the formula. There's the so-called bonus category at the bottom, and it's been pointed out that it shouldn't be called bonus because it is integral to the formula. But in addition to those things, if folks are doing other things, so example, some groups own or manage land, some do tons of school presentations. Some, like yourselves, have a separate fundraising event. Because of the level of effort that goes into those, they are recognized and given points under the formula as well. Any questions? And if I go through stuff too fast, just yell at me. And like I say, I'll show you how this is applied to Wheatley as well. So the last category is the performance category. And again, this is a point system. So every point that you get here is $300. So the first one is clear objectives aligned with your own priorities as well as our departmental priorities. So goals, objectives leading to those goals, and a work plan. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. Was the work plan accomplished as planned? And was it complete, and the reporting, was that on time? And folks, groups aren't penalized if funding didn't come through. So this time of year, when the groups are putting their work plans, they'll say, you know, we think we're going to do this project, but it depends on federal funding. And if we don't get the funding, we can't do it. You're never going to be penalized for that. In the final report, the groups will just say, this is what we had in our work plan, here's what we accomplished, here's what we didn't accomplish, and the reasons why. There's a financial review, so every year we take a number of groups and do, I hesitate to call it an audit because our financial folks don't like me using the word audit, and folks aren't actually auditors, but we have staff that will take the books and say, okay, I want to see the receipts to go with the expenses, just to be sure everything's on the up and up. We do field assessments of every group every year, so what we do is we just take the work plan, and we'll pick one or two items that we send an appropriate biologist out to take a look at. So it could be tree planting, it could be stream and habitat work, it could be nest box creation. If you had a big project like a pond restoration, that's probably what will be picked. But all I try to do is just get an assortment of the various types of work that the groups do and pick those out for field review. And who does the field review depends on the type of work. If it's a tree planting or forestry project, it'll be a forester or forest tech. If it's fish work, it'll be our fish biologist. If it's pond work, it'll be the guy that coordinates our pond projects. So just whoever is appropriate to do that. And again, there's some so-called bonuses for things like innovation, new techniques, adaptive management, and I'll give you some more examples there. And this is a rolling 5-year average, and the Alliance asked that we put that in just to try to smooth out any peaks and valleys in the funding, getting back to that concept of predictability. So let's say, hypothetically, a group had a top-notch coordinator that had been there for 10 years, knew everything about everything, and was excelling at everything. That coordinator goes on somewhere else, and somebody new that really doesn't have experience in this field is hired. You could expect some of those marks might drop. But you don't want the group to take a big hit just because of a transition, or because something happened, or because they didn't have the funding to do what they wanted to do. So it's a rolling 5-year average to kind of smooth that out. So how is this applied to Wheatley River? And I'm just going to give you an example of last year's breakdown. So your area amount is constant from year to year. So $1.09 per hectare. Your watershed has approximately 8,975 hectares in our system. If that sounds really weird, if you're thinking, oh my goodness, I thought we had 12,000 hectares, let me know. But this is how we're mapped. So 8,975 by $1.09, that's what you come up with. Your leveraging last year, you had $16,023 in non-provincial funds, which puts you into that second category, so $2,500 allocated there. Community involvement, you scored 50 out of 50. Absolutely excelled on community involvement. Full marks, So 7,500 there. And the last category, performance, was 41 out of 50, which is an excellent mark, by the way, and I'm going to break down those last two in a sec. For 12,300, so your last year's funding under the WMS, the Wildlife Management Fund, was $32,080, and that's how it was broken down. So I'll just go through sort of, what does that look like? How do we figure that out? So there's your scores, remember those categories we talked about a minute ago, and there's how you scored and why. So you can see all the numbers there, 43 members reported, 780 volunteer hours reported, tons and tons of public events, to the point that you got a bonus mark for that. You guys have a lack of public events, that's great. Some of the so-called bonuses, collaboration with other groups. You guys do a lot of work with Hunter Clyde in particular, probably some others, but Hunter Clyde stands out. So there's a point for collaboration. Innovation, and I think that was for the River Clyde Festival, or there was a pageant, yeah, it was, so innovation bonus for that. You have a fundraising event, so you get a bonus for that. A photo contest, love to see photo contests, that's a great way to promote stuff in the community. So that's where that 50 out of 50 came from. So the performance, it's not moving, that would be right. The performance was 44 out of 50. And where the group lost the most points, but I say this because this was consistent right across the board. Virtually every group got 9 out of 13 on that first one, which is clear goals, objectives, and work plans. And that's one thing I've been working with all of the groups with. We had a special session last fall. I've been working individually in some groups, and I can say that, like your work plans, you're excellent. So, what we were trying to get away from is in the group's goals, there were a lot of kind of motherhoody goals that are really hard to measure and communicate. So what we're trying to get groups to do is, rather than something like increase wildlife or improve wildlife habitat, specifically what does that mean? We had a lot of groups that would have a goal, for example, plant trees. Plant trees is a fabulous activity, but why are you planting trees? What are you trying to achieve? And I try to tell the groups, I'm not trying to be a pain in the butt and really bureaucratic about this. What I'm trying to do is to get the groups help me communicate the importance of these programs. So when I go in looking for more money for watershed management, I want to be able to tell the decision makers we're trying to increase forest area in low forest cover watersheds because that improves water quality, so people have clean water to drink, right? As an example. So some of those tangible things. So most of your points last year came off on the goals, objectives, and work plan. That was consistent right across the board, and based on my review of work plans this year, those have really come up, and the work plan for this group looks really good this year. Activities accomplished as planned. What you guys said you were going to do is what you did. Financial review was great. Nothing came up in the field assessment. And you got 3 bonuses, again, for collaboration. For a major project. You guys are involved in the Winter Woodlot Tour, right? Yes. So you get that is a huge project. So even though it wasn't able to go off because of weather, that's not your fault. So you're definitely recognized in your score. And for a group of your guys, you guys do a whack of work. So that's recognized in the score as well. So 44 out of 50, the rolling average, it was 37 last year. So that came up when you add those together and divide them for your average, you get your final score of 41, which is where that number came from. I wanted to end just with a couple of points. One of my jobs, I think, is to sell the importance of the watershed management program to decision makers in the province. So I talked about that's why I need some of that environmental information and what are we trying to accomplish province-wide. This is a really important environmental program, but it's also a really important economic program. And I think, to me, it's important that that message be sold. As an example, last year, there was more than $1.7 million that was brought in from outside sources, non-provincial funds. That's a lot of money. That was a low, some groups didn't do any fundraising at all, and that's fine. Again, we're not telling groups what to do. If you do it, it'll be recognized under the formula. Some groups had almost 400,000. But what's important to me is that obviously there's a relationship between how much funds you raise and the size of your group. Bigger groups have more capacity to raise funds. But there's some really high-performing groups in that $40,000 to $60,000 range, which is where you guys are, that really outperform, and I'll show you on the employment stats too in a sec. But really, what I say is punch above their weight. On the economic impact, employment is really important as well. So we had 189 people employed in watersheds across the province last year. That's 189 people, almost exclusively in rural areas of the province, where it's real hard to find work. You can see the stats up there, more than 3,000 weeks with a total payroll of more than 2 million. And you can see the ranges of the medians for each of those. I don't need to read them off for you. Oh, there we go. But again, what I like to point out is it's not just those big groups that hire a lot of people. So the median number of employees was 7, but you can see all of these above the median here in the middle that are very often those mid-funded groups. So again, those smaller groups are having significant crews and getting a lack of work. So that's all I had to present, and I'm happy to answer questions. Any questions on the funding formula? It's really important to me. The transparency component is important. So I hated having to stand up in front of people and say, I can't tell you where your funding came from, why I had that number. Now I feel I can, and I'm happy to answer any questions about that, of the watershed program generally, or just about our division. Yeah.
Were there any groups, watershed groups, that were really disappointed with the rollout of this new funding?
Yes.
And why, I guess?
There were 2 groups, and I would say this if they were standing in the room too. So Southeast Environmental Association in Montague was one of them. They're one of the groups that are capped at that 58,000, and they feel that that's really unfair. So there were only 2 groups that voted against the funding formula. They were one, and it was primarily if that cap were there, they'd get about $22,000 additional dollars than they do get. So they feel that's a real penalty to their group. The other group that voted against the formula was Caspenbeck, and they felt it was more bureaucratic and that it was forcing them to adjust their work, that they were jumping through hoops to get the funds. So rather than doing the work that was priority to them, they were doing the work that was priority to the fund. I personally disagree with that, but it's a discussion I've had with them, and we just agreed to disagree on that.
Yeah. I think as a board, I'm on the board. We agree there's more paperwork involved, more pushing the paper, but I don't think overall we had any big issues with it, mainly because our funding stayed about the same. That's probably why we didn't complain too much.
It did, well, yeah, it didn't. And what I should have mentioned, under the formula, and it still continues, for the first 3 years, and we've extended it for 1 more year, all the groups were red circled. So if, when the formula was applied, your group would have gotten less money than it did prior to the formula, we brought you up to that status quo. So the first year, if I'm not mistaken, 16 of, at that time we had 23 groups were red circled, and today it's down to 6. And those 6, some of those red circling, like one group was in the hole by close to $40,000, and now I think the biggest is 6. So they are raising their level. On the paperwork side, if there's ever anything that you guys, because you're the ones that are doing it, if you're saying, well, this would be a lot easier if, then let me know. Because I'm always interested in taking out steps where I can and making things easier for the groups. So always open for suggestions like that.
The second question I had was, how does Wheatley River, and maybe you kind of sort of answered this at some parts of the presentation, but how do we stack up amongst all the watersheds? I guess you said we're kind of in the middle.
Yeah, and I might be able to find the Wheatley River dump here.
And the second part with that would be, where should we improve to get up in the list?
I think in terms, your work is excellent and you're doing a whole lot of work, so there's nothing that I can say there. And actually it's probably reflected in this slide, so I think you guys, what did I say, 38? So you'd be, I think that is you here. So on the leveraging end, groups at your size are getting more money from other sources, and that's not a criticism, it's just a statement. So if there's anything we can do to help you seek other sources, if there's other sources that you'd like to apply to but you don't feel you have the capacity or something, then let me know and we'll work on that. But really, the 2 areas that stood out were the leveraging and the sort of work plan goals. Work plan goals was an across-the-board problem. and the leveraging is just a matter of groups' priorities. There's only so much that you can do. So yeah, so where do you stack up? I believe this dot is you, so sort of where you are in leveraging compared to the others, and you can kind of see also compared to groups of your size. These are mostly, we have geographic differences on the island in our watershed groups. The Western groups don't like leveraging other funds. They just like to use the WMF, and that's, again, totally fine. I'm not going to criticize them for that. So these are mostly the Western groups here. And where you stack up on the you guys had, I believe, 7 employees, that's not right? Remember how many you had last year? 4? 5. One of these is yours. So again, there are groups with more employees, but they, again, to a certain extent, are some of the larger groups. So you're kind of in the middle back there.
So would you have suggestions of where, like, organizations that other watersheds are using for leveraging, or is that up to us to do some research?
Not at all. I can certainly give a list. And Mary Finch is our watershed ecologist, and she's actually full-time with the Watershed Alliance. So it's totally not a secret. We can give you a list, and here's all the other agencies that other groups tap into. And again, it's totally up, like, if they don't fit with your priorities, don't go after it. That's not what I'm suggesting, but at least it'll let you know what's out there.
You mentioned a person who looks after the pond projects.
Yes.
What's the deal there?
So Alan McClendon is kind of our college person. You know Alan? Yeah. So he'll provide technical advice on what can, usually more with the structures, like fish passage and if the structure needs to be replaced or repaired. But he provides advice on that. Alan is close to retirement, unfortunately. He's one of those sort of corporate memories in the organization, and we've been trying to get him to get what's in here in there, but so far, I don't know.
But there's no straight out funding for that.
No, we don't have funds for that. What we can say is there's no limitations on what you use WMF for, so it's up to the group's priorities to do that.
What other best practices are happening across the island that are effective?
That's a broad question. Do you have any particular areas, whether it's
I'm just thinking a little bit in terms of planning. Like, I do feel a little bit like we don't have a long-term plan, and then every year we kind of, reevaluate and pick and choose. But I don't know if we're addressing like some of the bigger issues in a systematic way.
I love that question. And I love that question because the province isn't doing that either. It's not doing that. And it drives me nuts in my division that we're not able to do that. So in terms of the planning piece, I'm trying to get my division to move towards landscape level planning. So we can kind of look on a systematic way of some of those questions that you just asked. And I hope that will help the groups. So right now I'm not aware of any resource that will help with that. On an actual on-the-ground management piece in terms of best practices, we have our forest management guidelines in the province, so sort of what standards different types of forest management should be done. And there is an in-stream guide, you guys probably can't remember what it's called, but the water course manual, what I mean? But that's more of a technique specific as opposed to that bigger picture that you asked. It wasn't a very good answer for you, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm just wondering because with the turnover of directors and summer staff, and it'd be good to have like a vision.
Absolutely.
So that people could continue on and work on projects that were started sort of.
And I think we're working toward that collectively. So what I did for the groups last spring, I think, it was last fall, is at least communicate our division's priorities for things that we're hoping are common priorities and how to raise the bar with things. Again, with that landscape level planning, one of the things we're moving to with our division is things like, for example, for the public lands that we manage, how much of that do we want in oilfield habitat? How much do we want in habitat for X? How much do we want in commercial forest? Because right now we can't answer those questions, and it shocks me that nobody's been asking me those questions. So I'm hoping over the next year we're going to get there, and that may help if the watershed groups share the goals that we have, that may help with some of those.
Does the funding plan promote multi-year projects?
No is the short answer, and that is one of the weaknesses. So the evaluations are done on a year-to-year basis. Trying to kind of answer that. Yeah, because of the way the evaluations are done, I can't even tell you this year's. I can tell you the minimum that you're going to be getting this year. I can tell you you're probably going to be getting in the ballpark of what you got last year, but I can't tell you that 3 or 4 years out. So that is definitely a weakness of the fund. Under the old system, we had 3-year contracts, so you were getting X amount for 3 years. And if you can think of a way that we can have a fair scoring that also incorporates a multi-year component, I'm absolutely open to that.
I'm just wondering, does it penalize us if we come up with a multi-year project? How does it fit into this? I guess if we break it up into yearly smaller sub-projects or something, that may be how to maximize a multi-year project.
You wouldn't be penalized for sure. Unfortunately, you wouldn't. There's no incentive to do it, which is unfortunate. But I mean, you could simply say, so let's say it's a pond restoration project. So next year, phase 1 of pond X restoration, and that would be fine. It doesn't even have to be broken up, and next year could just be a continuation of pond restoration.
How many directors do other groups have, and do they have problems keeping or maintaining that number or growing that number?
So the fewest directors that I'm aware of is 6, and the largest I'm aware of is 12.
We only have 5.
Oh, sorry. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's 5.
I think it's 5.
The 6th one's an honorary.
And absolutely. So there are many groups, they have an AGM like this. There was one group last night, I won't mention any names, but basically they had an AGM in the coordinator's living room, and it was just the executive that were there. They know there's no point publicizing that they're not going to get a turnout. So absolutely, yeah, there is definitely difficulty attracting and retaining directors, for sure. As a PEI small, just burnout with people, right? Just, so many people are involved in so many not-for-profits, and it's just, they're asked to do a lot. Any other questions for us?
Do you have any long-term hopes for the Wheatley project?
Every success, for sure. Like I said, for a group of your size, I'm impressed with the amount of work that you guys are able to do. And like I said, if I could give you more than 50 points on the community involvement end, I would, because it really is outstanding the amount of effort that you guys put into that, which is really important. So,
Any problem, I guess, what I was thinking more environmental, like in terms of the watershed environment itself. Are there any big pressing issues?
Nothing comes immediately to mind. That's a really good question. And I tend to gravitate more towards some of the upland stuff because there is a lot of focus on in-stream habitat, which is great. I love fish. They're awesome, and all the other aquatic life. I see a lot of issues in the upland areas, whether it's forest management or some of the agricultural practices and things, and it's a tough one. I mean, as I tell folks, if it was an easy problem to solve, it would have been solved years ago. So. Unless you kick me out, I'm going to stay for the rest of the meeting. So if folks have other questions later on, I'll be around. So.